Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sunrise Disco. I'm your host, Chris Susanto, and joining me today are our usual hosts, Linus and Nathan. How are you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. It's been a bit exhausting week, but it's good to settle in with a beverage that is non-alcoholic but warm and cozy, and just do a little bit of podcasting.
Of course, classic. Everyone hydrate yourself. Hydration is really important. How about you, Nathan? How are things going? Happy Easter, everyone, by the way.
Easter continues. Yeah, glory be. It's going all right.
That's awesome.
And what about you, Chris?
I'm doing good. Things are picking up. The weather's looking good. All my windows are open. Everyone can see inside my room, can see I'm podcasting. So super excited. Let's just start off with an easy question. How has this Easter season been, especially during this time of COVID? Let's start with Nathan.
It's been great. I really it's gonna sound very terrible because I'm not suffering like some people are suffering right now, but I definitely feel the suffering aspects and sharing it. I'm feeling more united in suffering with Christ, but that's more intellectually as we deal with this madness as it continues. But the silver lining being that the truth, Jesus, the truth, hasn't been. This is the easiest time in my life that I've ever had to consider my faith true or not. There's very little doubt now, so that is a great blessing.
Oh, that's so good to hear. And I mean, it's really important to know that other people's suffering doesn't diminish your suffering. And I think everyone knows that they're suffering right now, especially not being able to go to mass and everything. So we feel you, Nathan. How about you, Linus? How's it going? How's Easter for you?
It's okay. I mean, I think I alluded to this earlier, where I'm really good at buckling down and doing the suffering thing for Lent, and we got some good suffering in for this Lent. But I guess the let off or the light at the end of the tunnel was a bit of doesn't seem to proportionally scale to the suffering that we got to go through. So really, I'm struggling a little bit with that. Again, similar to Nathan, I feel like I'm not really in a position to complain too much. I get to help out at Mass every now and then, and all things considered, it is pretty good. I'm just not really in a celebratory mode, I guess. So
no, it's not materially. I can assume for Linus, I mean, we're both in professional jobs that allow us to work from home. And I mean, there's a lot of benefits to that. And, 20-foot commute and other things. But it's the making sense of everything and trying to understand how the Christian West is that philosophy that the West has been built on is gone, and that's hard to process, and then taking it for granted. But again, as I said before, silver lining is that when you see so much untruth out there, and it's really easy to root yourself with Jesus, and I don't feel weak saying that. I'm really, really leaning on him and wishing that I could be a better servant to him, because it's so abundantly clear that our faith is true, and so to not abide by that faith and face these trials better is something that has to be worked on.
100%, and I think it's actually kind of crazy how everything is almost getting to the point of like sheer ridiculousness that it's almost easier to see what is true and what is right and what is wrong because of how stark the difference is between the two, right? Especially when it's like a gray area of everything, of opinion and of personal position, it might be difficult to differentiate. But now that things are super like ridiculous, I think it maybe has even gotten easier to see what's true and what's right versus what's wrong. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. I think for me especially, it's been a good Easter. It's just I can totally feel the need for people to go back to mass. I mean, everyone that I talk to has been telling me how much they miss going back to mass. So yeah, I mean, like as someone who has been going to mass since the pandemic has started, I almost feel I feel I feel a sadness for other people as opposed to myself. So I obviously can never complain because I get to go to mass every week. But yeah. We have 2 readings today. Does everyone have their Bibles open?
We do.
Yep.
I do. I can't speak for Linus.
Yep. I do have the Bible open.
Linus, why don't you read the first one, Isaiah, and Nathan, why don't you take the second one? Hey.
Sure.
Okay. Should I do more than what we normally get, or should I just do what's prescribed?
Do as much as you need to. Do as much as you need to. You're always welcome to do that.
Okay. All right. You're getting the Douay Reams again, so
please
brace yourselves.
And with the accent, please. With the accent,
yeah. We don't have any viewers yet from the glorious land of England to complain.
We don't know yet. Who knows?
Yeah, that's fair. Shout out to our one Greek listener, by the way. We really appreciate you. So, yeah. Where was I? Here we are. Behold, the hand of the Lord is not shortened, that it cannot save, neither is his ear heavy, that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have divided between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you, that he should not hear. For your hands are defiled with blood, and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken lies, and your tongue uttereth iniquity.
Do you know what? Now I can see why they only cut it to verse 2. Verse 1, 3, and 4 is kind of a downer. Not gonna lie.
Hey! We need the downers.
Douay Ream really just they don't hold back. They don't hold back their punches. Hey,
that's the best way to do it, right? Like if we're...
That's true. The truth will set you free. Does anyone want to talk about it? I mean, I always have things to talk about, but what do you get from that, Nathan?
Oh, well, I'm trying to process the extension of what Linus brought to the table. I think I said that in our first podcast, or was the second one? I can't remember what it was, but there's a healthy discussion to be had in our church when sharing the faith with people. I think, especially in this time of COVID, where there's such a strong divide over people who do go to mass and are essentially chasing after Jesus, but there is these interpretations that I think get muddied too much, and I think there's a focus a little too much on trying to make the Bible attractive in quotation marks, try to make it be like, oh, it's this life affirming, and which it is, but you know, it's also the truth, and the truth is wraps itself in the fullness of who humans are, who God is, and what is our interactions with him. And the only way that you can face truth is to fully hear it, fully accept it, fully embrace it, and understand that the beautifulness of our faith, the beautifulness of having a Messiah, is the fact that the truth can be, frankly, quite ugly. We can be very ugly, and we are in need of a savior. So, I don't know. I think I don't want to get too much on my soapbox here, but I feel there's a time now, I think, where we shouldn't feel afraid to bring in those downer verses to flesh out the point that the Bible is making about our human nature and about how that nature is redeemed through Christ.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, like, you can see it with like every revision of the Bible. Like, as we get more and more revised, you almost like euthanize the message that that the Bible's trying to portray into like modernized vernacular, and it like dumbs down the message and kind of like obscures the true meaning of what it's trying to say, right? And I mean, like, obviously it makes sense. Like you can see why people would want to dumb down the Bible and kind of make it super attractive. But at the same time, that's kind of like obscuring the truth of what is really true in the Bible. So I can totally see that. And I think this is an example, right? Like, we only had to read verse 2, but verse 1, 2, 3, 4 is really just plain and simple. It outlines kind of our humanity, our concupiscence, and the consequences of our actions.
I've got a little bit of a random side story to throw in before I kind of offer my thoughts in, and it doesn't offer any new meat, but I just thought it's a fun little anecdote. So
Go for it.
when I was an undergrad, Cardinal Sarah was in Toronto, so a bunch of friends and I, we were like, you know what, we're getting in the car, we're gonna go see Cardinal Sarah give a talk, and like the talk was okay, but just the real highlight of that event was just watching Cardinal Sarah like walk around, and the way that he genuflects the Eucharist. That's some powerful stuff. But that doesn't really pertain to what I wanted to share. So after we heard this talk, there's like a all day diner that's right next to the cathedral. It's Cardinal Collins's favorite place to get breakfast. So if you ever want to give him a treat, then you take him there for breakfast for steak and eggs. But yeah, so we finished listening to this talk, so we all go to this diner to grab some dinner before we get the 3-hour drive back to Waterloo. So we're sitting down and we're just we're talking about the talk. We're talking about how awesome Cardinal Sarah is because he's awesome.
That's awesome.
And a friend of mine, I don't even remember why we got on this topic, but we're talking about Pope Benedict at that point. And my friend quips, he's like, guys, I used to take a pill of vitamin B16 every morning. And we all laugh because he's referring to, Pope Benedict and whatnot. And then I kind of come in right afterwards and I was just like, what happened? Did they start watering it down?
Stop.
And then, so the thing is, my other friend starts like telling us to be quiet because she notices on the next table is
Ano ba?
we maybe got ourselves in a little bit of trouble with a relatively major Catholic public figure. So yeah. Anyways, the point that I actually wanted to bring up really is, I think is the first part of this verse, right? The verse 1. That kind of points out that, it's not a reflection of God's power that the salvation is delayed or that separation has been put between us, right? And that weight or that separation really doesn't indicate anything about the limitations on God's power. This one is totally on us. I think it's C.S. Lewis, and I can't remember if this is in The Four Loves or in Mirror. This might be in The Four Loves. But he basically says, like, when we are sent to, when we arrive at the pearly gates and we're sent to hell, it's not a case where God at the gate is like, go to hell. And we're like, okay, sure, no problem. It's more along the lines of like, God will open the gates of heaven and be like, all right, come on in. And we'll be like, no, I'd rather not. That other place sounds more awesome.
That totally makes sense. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. Does anyone want to comment on like, on how this kind of reading portrays like, the aspect of sin in like Catholicism in general? Like, like what is sin, what does it do? Because I mean, like it's kind of clear like what sin is, but this reading specifically talks about like what sin does to our relationship with God. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I got a shot if you like.
Please go for it.
Yeah. Sin is disordered. It is disordered living. It is disordered. Um, it is lies. It is a lie to live ways. And like Linus said, God doesn't reject us. God is very sad if we reject him. If we, when we find out, I mean, I can only imagine the realization that somebody must be like, oh dear God, I'm going to hell, and I rejected you, and God's like, you had all you had to do. And it's not that he's gloating it over you. He's just like, you are so loved, and yet you could not love yourself enough to to love him. And yeah, sin is very serious. There's actually, I don't know if you guys saw the Jordan Peterson and Bishop Barron talk. I mean, here's a hot take. I think Jordan Peterson has a better understanding of our church when it comes to evil than Bishop Barron does.
That is a really hot take. I don't know if we can allow that at the
We're gonna have like these squads of like members and subscribers of the Word on Fire like spamming our comments now.
No, but I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I can appreciate where Bishop Barron is coming from with love and not wanting to speak of condemnation, but they were talking about they were talking about Cain and Abel, and Bishop Barron brought up the point that in Cain's mind, his action was justified. It was good to him. And Jordan Peterson said, no, he basked in his envy and he turned away to evil in killing his brother. And he demonstrates that because when God questions Cain, Cain's making all these excuses about it. He's like, you don't love me, this and that. He's like, and God's like, no, we are united, and you and your definition of what love needs to be, you did something so disordered out of your own selfishness. And yeah, Bishop Barron, they had to agree to disagree, but I'm like, after Jordan Peterson said that, I'm like, I really hope you convert, my friend, because you deserve the church after being able to deduce that situation. And Peterson coming from a psychological perspective, and he's like, do not underestimate evil. People can willfully choose this. And I think he didn't say this, but kind of reading between the lines, and why I think Jordan Peterson is so popular is the fact that the crowd, the Bishop Barrons of the world, which is kind of the mainstream church, is trying to tell us that yes, there's evil, but there's salvation, and Jesus is good and come be saved, which is true, but it doesn't bask in the controversy. It doesn't walk out and say, no, this is a truly evil, and if you allow this evil to continue, if we don't speak and hate the sin, then we are not in true charity and love. And
wait. Yeah. Isn't by definition the sin of Cain literally the sin that cries out to heaven? Like, not just any old sin, all right? Like, by definition, one of the worst ones that, through its very action, screams out so loudly that God can't ignore it. All right. Does Genesis not tell us this in more direct terms?
Well, I guess Jordan Peterson and the Bible itself.
But how does that relate to what Jordan Peterson's talking about? Because he's saying, like, yes, it's a sin that cries to heaven, but like, I think the argument is that like saying it's justified diminishes the consequence of the sin itself. I don't think that's the intention, but I think it does because it provides what's the word, motive to the action. Therefore, the culpability is lessened, which I don't think is very true. And also, it's like, I think from a psychological standpoint, it totally makes sense how Cain knew it was evil and knew it wasn't the right thing to do, even though it was justified. Because why would you make up excuses and detract from the original point if you didn't know it was wrong? It's a defense mechanism.
So Chris, the fact that it's a sin that cries out to heaven doesn't mean that it's justified. It means that it is worse than
It's the worst sin possible.
Yeah, well, not the worst sin possible. That's a sin against the Holy Spirit, but it is like on your scale of sins, that is it's
solid 9.5.
Yeah. So I think that my comment was more kind of redirected back at the Bishop Barron. And if I didn't get to watch this episode, so I don't know if they address it later. But like, if I were in the room within that conversation, that would be my point, that you can't like, there is no way that he could have perceived that it was like good, or that Cain's rationale was justified in any way, shape, or form, because of the egregious nature of it, right? Because we know what the definitions that are required for a mortal sin, right? And we know that this is a sin that cries out to heaven. So this is like the worst of the mortal sins. Mm-hmm. So by virtue of definitions, then he had to be aware of what was evil about it and still chose to do it anyways.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's kind of the power of evil, right? It's like you become so consumed by your own personal agenda that you fail to recognize objective truths within your life, right? Or within reality. Almost. It's like your own personal justification supersedes what you know to be objectively and morally correct.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of speaks to like concupiscence as a whole. It's like a lot of the times when we are tempted to sin, we know what is morally correct, yet are like we get so consumed by personal agenda that we supersede what we know in order to pursue what we want. And I mean, like, I know one of the most common things that people do is when they commit a sin is in order to cope with the guilt and cope with the feeling of remorse. And this is like not even for just sins, this is for like bad things in general. Well, obviously they're all sins, but whatever. You can logicize through it to give yourself less culpability, and that's something quite common. And I mean, that's something that I think most people do, including myself. And it's hard to fight that urge, because that's kind of like who we are as people. We are born with original sin. We have concupiscence and tend towards sin.
Yeah,
I like your point on it's a sin against reality. One of the things I didn't really think much about the Cain and Abel story until going through the Bible with Father Mike Schmidt and Bible in a year. Although
classic,
it's going to probably take me 2.5 years at the rate I'm going. But he brings up the fact that in our modern culture, you could justify Cain. Cain's like, oh, God favors Abel. God is like, he's like the favorite son, like the light son, and I am just the rejection. And maybe in my late teens, early 20s, I could relate to that. I could be like, yeah, what the heck? Like, this guy's the golden boy. And he's all like walking around all high and mighty and shoving it over Cain's face. And the problem is that reality is he isn't. Abel is just living rightly with God. And
correct.
It is actually Cain that can't accept himself and accept where he is, and that God loves him just as much, or, well, not even just as much. I mean, like, he loves him as fully as he loves Abel, but he cannot comprehend that his uniqueness, his own way is different, but still great. And I think that's something that I identify with it, because I am often very self-critical and I get jealous and envious of people very quickly when they can do things that I want to be able to do myself. And it's like, how did he chat up that girl when I mean, and this is pre-marriage. I mean, I am very.
I was like, oh, whoa. Were we digging Nathan's
okay,
grave
okay.
already?
Yeah, speaking of sin, no, no, that's no, but like, yeah, you get jealous of someone's performance at work, and you're like, oh, well, I'm working just as hard, and they did it so effortlessly. Like, how dare they not recognize me? And you think you could justify the action, but you can't.
It's actually super interesting, actually, because what you were saying, it's like, it's not the fact that Abel is living incorrectly, is that Cain cannot accept and he is insecure about himself. That is like the definition of microaggressions. It's like not being aggressed on directly, but witnessing something and having it and taking it as a personal attack on your character because it does not identify with your own personal beliefs. That is like literally a microaggression, right? It's like they are not necessarily doing something to aggress on you. Is your perception of their actions
So
is aggressing on you because of your own personal problems,
So-
which is super interesting because that's like a very prevalent problem right now.
you're saying that Cain is the first snowflake?
Yeah, I was about to say he's Agent Zero of the snowflakes.
But Cain to snowflakes is Adam to original sin.
Okay, I want to move on a little bit, but I do want to say that I think for this reading, the most important thing that I personally take on it and that I kind of hear from it is that line where it's like, when you commit sin, you have hid God's face from you so that he does not hear you. So it's like God is always listening, but the action of sin turns you around so that you are not talking directly to him. And I think that really, really speaks to kind of the intentionality of sin and its effects, because it is not like people always say, why does God not love me? Why does God not listen to me? It is not that. You are just not facing him because of your position in life and your actions. And I think that really speaks to the responsibility of sin and kind of like how it works in terms of your relationship with God. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I think that's a super interesting point about this reading.
I mean, to expand on that, Chris.
Yeah.
There's a. I guess today this is gonna be the episode where we reference the most of our great English Catholic literature. But there's a poem by Cardinal Newman called "The Dream of Gerontius," and it's a wonderful little reflection of just a soul who dies, and then like what happens in the immediate moments after that. And the thing that's kind of interesting about The Dream of Gerontius, spoilers, for something that has been out for over 100 years now, is that the Dream of Gerontius ends basically because when the soul encounters the face of Jesus for the very first time, and in that singular moment of seeing Jesus, seeing so much love and tenderness and mercy, the soul is, this is just any old average soul, by the way, not necessarily a good or a bad person, but the soul is so moved by the magnitude of that charity and that love that the soul basically pushes away everything and says, take me away and throw me into the darkest pit so that I can be ready to see Jesus again. And that's how the poem ends. It's the angel kind of the guardian angel gently laying the soul into purgatory, and the prayers of everyone else in purgatory that one day the Lord they will get to see their Lord, and that He is their refuge and their strength. But it's not going to be in this particular moment.
And I think it like takes time to turn back, and that's like obviously the point of purgatory, right? It's that we need to be cleansed in order to fully receive the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
what's it called again?
The Dream of Gerontius.
Ooh, I should give that a read.
Yeah, it's not a long read. There's like 4 major segments to it, and they read pretty fast.
Does it have pictures though?
It does not. It has an audio picture because Edwin Elgar put a musical setting to it.
Okay, I'm down. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. That's my favorite guy.
Yeah. So, yeah, just saying.
Oh, I'm down. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Sorry about that. I think we should move on to the next question if that's okay with you guys.
All good.
Linus, do you want to give it a... Oh, sorry. Nathan, do you want to give it a go?
Yes, and I think the single verse is all that's needed for this.
Okay, hot take.
Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into this world, and through sin death, so also death was transferred to all men, to all who have sinned.
I think this one's pretty straightforward. I know. So I guess for those of you that have not been a leader for faith studies, you don't get to see this. But on the leader's guide, there's like 2 full pages of notes in response to this question. But this one is pretty straight. I say it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, if death came into the world through sin, and not just necessarily a spiritual death, but also a physical death too. And I know this was when I first led Discovery in Toronto, this was a major sticking point for one of my participants, because she kind of kept seeing it as a spiritual death and not a physical one. But I think the greatest example that we can see is Mary, who had no sin, and as a result of that, didn't die. Right? She was assumed into heaven directly. Right? And that is the same promise that was given to us and given to Adam and Eve at the very beginning. But because of original sin, we've lost that. Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that is one of the biggest distinctions I think people learn to make, is that when we talk about the consequence of sin is death, people don't realize the gravity of what that statement means. It's like they think death is like some obscure concept that could mean like, oh, we're just not talking to God, so it's like we are dead, right? Like that's quite a common approach to that phrase, I think. But by following Jesus, you are promised eternal life, and by not, what's the opposite of eternal life? Eternal death, right? That could be like a huge bomb on someone, right? Figuring out that when they say sin leads to death, it's truly the death of all deaths. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, gonna say, the physical side of death. I mean, even if you live righteously, you may still have death, and it could be an ugly death. I'm sure Stephen didn't enjoy his stoning on a physical level, but the thing is,
Saint Stephen, not Stephen, our editor.
No.
Depends
how you make me sound, Stephen. Just let you know.
Okay.
I guess a ski accident is a kind of stoning.
But yeah, no, sorry. Please continue.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. For whatever reason, this time of COVID, I've really thought about death a lot, and what does it mean to die? And I think there's something about our reaction to death today that is so final that, it's kind of like, I think we all intuitively know that our sin, that living for the world, it's kind of like, it's going to be gone. I'm going to face this death. And the only way to get over that fear of death, because again, even natural death can still be quite painful. Both my grandparents died of natural deaths, but they were in and out of the hospital. Both of them said a few weeks before both of them died, was like, I'm ready. Like, not that they wanted to be euthanized or anything like that, but they were both Christian, unfortunately not Catholic, but I had not converted then either. So I pray for them, but they still were with faith and were kind of like, well, I'm good with life, and there's a kind of a peace there. And I think with the death that separates us is dying, but it's also, you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and I can see that sin breaking away. I do have a side tangent to ask. Mary got assumed into heaven, but in Genesis, after the Cain and Abel incident, there were several children of Adam that walked with God and got lifted up as well. Is that the same thing as the Assumption?
The 2 famous examples are Enoch and Elijah.
Yeah.
And actually, for the Mormons, they believe that John the Apostle was also assumed in that same manner. but that's beside the point. So the easy answer is I don't know, but tradition has kind of always pointed to the two witnesses in Revelation being Enoch and Elijah. And so whether it is like them returning in the flesh, a desumption or a resumption, as it were, or if it is like two witnesses that are imbued with the spirit of Enoch and Elijah, in the same way that Jesus was mistaken to have had the spirits of Elijah or one of the other great prophets. We don't really know, and it's all kind of apocryphal anyways. But yeah, it's hard to tell is the long answer, because they, we do know that they were holy people. And in the case of Elijah, at least, and I'm pretty sure for Enoch as well, they were venerated as saints at one point. Yeah, I could be mistaken, but yeah, it's I'm not sure. I'm not confident in the same way that I'm confident that Mary was assumed.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite interesting, actually. I didn't know some of Adam's children was assumed as well. But also, like, keep in mind, like, Genesis is like very much like hard to take literally. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is versus the later writings of Elijah, right? Of the writings of Elijah, it's like how after Cain kills Abel, he goes off and gets married in another tribe. But how does that work if Adam and Eve are the only people? That sort of thing. And like that's a question that I've struggled with a lot. It's like what to take literally from Genesis versus what not to, right? Because I've actually never gotten a good answer for that one, for the Cain and Abel one.
Sorry, just to kind of go on your point there about Genesis. I don't know. It's the grace of COVID. Felt weird saying that.
That's a hot take.
That's a hot take.
That's
yeah.
a hot take.
That's a hot take. The grace of COVID for me personally, in terms of reflecting with my Lord, to me, it's almost like it doesn't matter. Like, I think we've made a religion. Well, we made a religion of physical science, and we're always like, oh, how does this timeline connect to this part? And well, there's a hole here, and it cannot be explained, and we need to fill that in with something. So therefore, it's wrong because it doesn't lay out exactly how many years it took from Adam and Eve, and if there's other people, and what about the dinosaurs, and all of that. all of that's
extremely hot take.
But frankly, the beauty of the Bible, and I think it's that's really come to light for me, is that none of that matters. Like, it matters in a sense of like using physical science to do a job, sure. And ironically, some of the best scientists of the past were either Catholic priests or Catholics that were very orthodox. So there's no division there. The Bible is an instruction manual for us to be united with God, to understand God, to be with God. And so therefore, it doesn't matter when our first parents were, and if dinosaurs were sitting there and Adam was petting his pet T-Rex while, hanging out in the garden. It doesn't matter if that took place.
Are you saying that it doesn't matter that Adam was looking at like amoebas and a stegosaurus for a potential partner before he met Eve?
Before he realized Eve was inside of him the entire time as a bone.
Oh, that's that raptor.
Insanely hot take. Actually, insanely.
I think
hot
the
take.
important thing is, especially with regards to Genesis, is that even though it may not be, I guess, scientific truth, there is capital T truth within it. In the same way that we can say, I don't know, if somebody was a gardener, we can say that they have a green thumb, right? And I'm sure there will be one day the archaeologists will look around and be like, that person was a gardener, and and popular legend said they had a green thumb. But we did the tests. Their thumb was not green, and they were a war amputee, so they didn't have thumbs. So clearly, this must be wrong, right? Just because it's not verifiable doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. Kind of rewinding to Enoch and Elijah, I don't think the important thing is to distinguish whether or not their assumptions are on the same level as Mary's assumption, right? We are told that they are taken into heaven, and from a scriptural sense, and we are told that Mary was taken up into heaven from a dogmatic ex cathedra sense, and that's all that really matters at the end, right? And we know that their lives were special to have been given such graces, and I guess through lower T tradition, we may be able to look forward to seeing Enoch and Elijah again at the end of time. So,
yeah, just because there's no writing of it doesn't mean it's not true. I think that's very true, and I think that's like the point of having faith in the church and divine intervention, especially in how the Bible was formed, and that's really important. But yeah, I think this reading is very self-explanatory. There's really not much to talk about. I mean, it just makes sense. Like one man caused sin, and the death from sin is real and is true, and it's just a consequence that everyone has to accept because it's true, and it's not a physical. It's more than a physical death. It's more than a spiritual death. It's actual eternal capital D death, actually, if you want to really talk about it like that. But it's very true, and I think this is like I'm gonna go back to what we were talking about. It's like this is one of the things where you really can't euphemize what they're talking about here, right? I know we were talking about how sometimes we tend to make things more digestible, more appealing to the public, but there's really no other way to euphemize this. I don't know. I can't think of a way to euphemize this. I don't know if you guys can.
Yeah, like we had a YouTube comment on one of our earlier episodes about how Nathan's earlier point about smelling like the sheep is that our flock leaders can start to behave like a sheep, and they forget that they're actually supposed to be a shepherd. All right, and one of the homilies that I heard over Good Shepherd Sunday was basically saying, "Hey, sheep are dumb. All right, they get easily distracted, they run off, and they're an amorphous mass of independently thinking animals that are only smart enough to follow what's immediately in front of them, and that's not easy to kind of keep such a flock in line."
But yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense, right? Like that's why I think the metaphor being made is not that we are dumb, but we need to be led because we are blind. It's like
we are dumb.
It's
blind.
like it's like how in order to keep a horse on track, you have to put blinders on it so it can only see forward. You know what I'm saying? It's like that. It's like we need to be led because we get distracted easily and we can't see what is truly, truly important in our lives. And I mean, that's just a bunch of things. That's all of the questions today. I mean, these questions are kind of depressing. Obviously, it's about sin, and I mean, no one likes to talk about sin. But I think the biggest takeaway from these two questions is that sin is something that we, as Catholics and as Christians, we can't really avoid talking about, right? We can't dumb it down. We can't euphemize it because it's the reality, and we can't fight reality, right? By accepting that Jesus is Lord and by accepting that God exists, we also accept the existence of sin and our tendency to sin.
Oh, if I could add to that, we should celebrate reality. We should bask in reality because, yeah, sin, death, evil, horribleness all exist and it's real. But so is Christ, and so is eternal life, so is redemption, so is forgiveness, and all the beautiful things that our church teaches. And so there's no reason to have to divorce one from the other. I mean, one of the things I never quite understood was why Fulton Sheen, the name just show life is worth living. I'm like, why don't you just call it like, Fulton Sheen or something a little more? But then I'm just like, oh man, people really don't like living. People don't like reality. And it's like, no, life life is great. Life is like we should celebrate it. Anyway, I oppose that we don't like talking about sin. No, talking about sin is great because we have the answer for sin.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Sin is great. The title of our
fault.
podcast, by the way.
Oh, happy fault. Yeah.
Oh, happy fault. And I mean, it makes sense. Like goes full circle, right? Like by acknowledging God exists, you acknowledge sin exists. By acknowledging sin exists, acknowledges that it's a problem and that it needs a solution. And by acknowledging that, we realize that the only solution is Jesus, right?
We have an aversion to sin or somebody stuck in sin, and we're like, oh yeah, we don't want to talk about that, so and so here. But then we are told by Christ that heaven will rejoice for that one sheep, going back to sheep again, that gets found, and then all the 99 who are faithful. So yeah, I mean, we don't like it when well, it's not even we are saddened if they are in deep sin, but we rejoice that they can come out of it.
I think that's a great way to end the podcast. I think that's beautiful. I guess that concludes this episode of Sunrise Disco. Please join us again for another episode of Sunrise Disco on Spotify or YouTube or anywhere else. If you have, and we're always reading questions and comments, so please, if you have any questions for any of us
Or
feedback, especially feedback, please comment on our YouTube. From Linus, Nathan, and myself, this is the end of our episode of Sunrise Disco, and I hope you guys end up taking faith studies because it's really interesting and we love it, and that's why we're here. So yeah, I guess that's it. Have a very nice night or evening or day wherever you guys are, and have a blessed Easter, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night and God bless.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Sunrise Disco. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support us, please share it with others. You can post about it on your social media or drop a review or rating below. Got questions or want to chat about something brought up this past episode? You can reach us at sunrisedisco.sapv@gmail.com. To catch all the latest from us, make sure you click that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again. God bless you, and we'll catch you next time.